Hello, my name is J.G. Ballard. I'm an English writer, and my latest book, Millennium People, has just been published in Italy. And I very much hope you'll read it and enjoy it, and perhaps you'll feel you want to read other books of mine. Um, One or two have been filmed, like Empire of the Sun by Steven Spielberg and Crash was filmed by David Cronenberg. And if you've seen those films, you'll have an idea of what my fiction is about. I try to surprise my readers a little bit, to show them an unconventional view of the world and perhaps reach into the sort of deep places in their minds. I hope that you feel the experience of reading my novels is worthwhile. Thank you. In Millennium People, I describe a group of present-day middle-class people living in London, in Chelsea, doctors, accountants, architects, who feel that they are being exploited. They feel the middle class is being taken for granted. They feel they're very conscious that society is exploiting them by relying on their sense of responsibility, because that's what the middle classes have always offered. They've offered responsibility. The middle classes, they run society. You know, the doctors, the lawyers, the policemen, the middle managers, the civil servants, they run society and hold it together. The rich spend their time, playing around. The working class work. But the middle classes have responsibility. And in return for that sense of responsibility, the middle classes have been given security, status, and a sense that they are important. Well, we now have a situation in England, and I think it's true in America, in France, Italy, Western Europe, where the middle class no longer has security. No, if you have a professional skill of some kind, as a lawyer, architect, doctor, there's no guarantee that you will have a job for life. Many middle-class people are not very well paid nowadays. In England, it's the middle classes have always sent their children to private schools. Now, many can't afford to do that. They used to go to private doctors. They can't afford that. They used to have servants. But most middle-class people in England can't afford servants anymore. So this is what the middle classes are protesting about. And in Millennium People, they start a small revolution. They see themselves as a new proletariat. They see themselves as a new working class. Now, you may say, how can a doctor, an accountant, an architect, a civil servant see himself or herself as one of the working class, one of the proletariat? Impossible. But this is not true. They realize that they are being exploited like the working class of 50 years ago. They work hard for very little pay, and they have no security. So they are protesting against what they see as their most basic conditions of life. They think their revolution, their acts of violence are entirely justified. They think that the only way they can attract attention to their problems is by setting off bombs. They bomb the BBC, they bomb art galleries, they bomb middle-class department stores. Talk to middle-class people in this country, and I'm sure it's true of Italy and France and Germany, and there's no sense of security, isn't there? These books of mine are about, Millennium People in particular, is about insecurity, the insecure middle class. Now, when any class becomes insecure, it becomes dangerous. And I try to spell out the kind of dangers that are growing in the year 2003 and will go on growing in the next years. And I remember listening to the radio and hearing the radio call sign of Sputnik 1, beep, 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 coming from outer space. And I remember thinking, my God, it's a message from a new world that's coming. But when I started writing my short stories, and then I wrote my first novel, The Drowned World, within a few years, I turned my back on outer space because I felt that, impressive though it was to launch this satellite, and later impressive though it was for Armstrong and the American astronauts to fly to the moon in 1969, it had nothing to do with our lives here, because life in this world, in our planet, on Earth, was much more interesting than anything that could happen in outer space. And I felt that it was psychological space, the changing inner space of human minds and human relationships in the post-war world. That was what was interesting, because everybody, was becoming a kind of explorer of their own inner space. People had the confidence to start exploring sexuality, drugs, recreation, the leisure society. People were exploring new kinds of relationships. People were looking at marriage and saying, should marriage last all of life? We have a new kind of, new sexes, in a sense, were emerging, with the sort of gays and lesbians were beginning to have a big influence on the culture generally, on fashion. People were exploring inner space in countless ways, and I felt this is what writers should be looking at, not outer space. So, The Drowned World was my first novel of inner space, in which I explored kind of the deep history of the human race that we all carry, in our blood, our memories of millions of years in the past, that that are in our genes, that are deep memories of primeval forests that are deep in our brains, that come out when we sleep at night, which we see in our dreams. This is The drowned world is about the great biological past on which all of us draws. You know, where each of us... I remember when my first child was born and I watched it emerge from my wife. And I was amazed. Here was this creature that was 1 or 2 seconds old. But I looked at this face, this head. It was like an Egyptian sculpture, smooth. I thought, my God, this is my son. He's millions of years old because the whole of the human race lies behind him. Then, click, and he was a baby of a few minutes old. But I had a glimpse of this enormous age we all are, really. We're part of an organism. Our fathers, mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, on and on into the past. The drowned world is about that past, a journey to discover that past. Crash is, in many ways, my most provocative novel. It's a novel that's upset a great many people. When David Cronenberg in 1996 made a film of Crash, he couldn't show the film in England for about a year. Many people got very upset about it. The strange thing is, at the same time, there is nothing that people like more than seeing films about car crashes. At the time I wrote Crash in 1971, 72, every Hollywood film had a car crash. But by the 70s, people, I think, were a little bored with sex. And they had the new sex was violence. People were fascinated by violence. If you look at the films that people watched then, it wasn't sex that they were interested in. It was violence. And I thought, what is it about people? They love car crashes. They love violence. Maybe, is it possible, I asked myself, if perhaps, far from being unhealthy, this interest in violence is a good thing? Is it possible that maybe the car crash is liberating in some way? It may be that human beings need violence. Maybe their imaginations are switched on by violence. Maybe it's as maybe our ancestry as hunting creatures. The human race has been incredibly bloodthirsty in its history. The history of the human race is the history of blood. It may be that violence, and in particular the violence created by technology, the technology of the car, maybe this is sort of liberating. Maybe it opens the mental doors to a new world. I'll write a book. I'll write a book in which I say car crashes are good. Car crashes are sexually fulfilling. And then see what happens. I think the most important thing about Empire of the Sun, which is based on my own childhood in Shanghai, in China during the Second World War, is really that people will do anything to survive. Survival is not just a matter of physical survival, of getting food, keeping warm. survival is mental, it's in the head, and that people will believe anything to survive. And my younger self, the boy, Jim, in Empire of the Sun, he learned, to begin with, he's frightened of the war, frightened of the Japanese, but he learns to love the war so that he can survive. The only way he can survive is to love the war. He becomes a war child.